If you want to know the full history of Lister cars, from its founder Brian Lister to the modern day, then you need to come to Portugal and interview Laurence Pearce. I'm Tiff Needell, a former racing driver, but more famous as a television presenter on Top Gear.
Hello, I'm Laurence Pearce, mechanic and former owner of Lister cars.
We're here in Portugal today to catch up with a missing link of the history of Lister. Laurence, how did you first get involved with Lister in any way or form?
Well, it goes back to the late 80s or middle 80s when Lister had reformed as a company with three entrepreneurial type guys, and they had brought out a range of conversions for the Jaguar XJS. By doing this from a marketing point of view, they introduced a racing championship called the Lister Challenge. Being a keen racer all my life, where my father was a driver, so on and so on, I got enthusiastic about the idea of making my own XJS and entering their challenge, not as a driver. And I had a friend who was quite well off, and he wanted to be a driver, and so he said to me, you make that car, I'll pick up the bills and we'll go racing. Well, I built the car, we did a little bit of testing, and we joined the Lister Challenge at their first race at Silverstone. Well, they had three cars in it of their own. Two driven by professional drivers, a guy called Roger Mack, who I knew, and another one, the more famous one of these days, Mike Jordan. And we beat them in the first race. And they didn't really like that, and we carried on, and we won the Lister Challenge, the overall thing, which was I think 10 races.
So what happened after you'd won that Lister Championship?
Well, the three of them, they came into my workshop, and one of their clients was a guy called Simon Taylor, who was a journalist, very well-known journalist, and in fact Formula One radio presenter for Radio 4. Anyway, he didn't like the car that they'd done for him, they'd built for him. And so the car was delivered to me, and then he met me the next weekend and he said, this is what I'd like to do. And we built the car up. They paid a lot of money for me to do the work, and he drove the car that weekend that we delivered it, and he went straight back to the office to write the article for the front cover of Autocar to say this was the car that Jaguar should have made. Simon then said to me he wants to introduce me to Brian Lister. So appointments were made and we drove up together, because Simon lived in London, I was near London. And we drove together and we went to meet Brian Lister for lunch in Cambridge.
How did you find Brian with his bow tie? You the mechanic, how did you dress?
Well, I suppose I dressed up a bit. I wouldn't have had many clothes. We used to go around in the boiler suit like 90% of the time. But I got a little bit dressed up, and I got the feeling straight away that he immediately liked what I was saying. And I knew a fair bit about the cars that he'd made because I'd seen them on the tracks when I was a kid growing up. And I remember one time I said to him at this meeting, we went back to his workshop to look at what he was doing. And I said to him, well, Brian, can I use your toilet? And he said to me, well, old boy, you can either use the works toilets down here, or you can use my own toilet in my own little bathroom in my office. So I said, oh, well, I might as well use that one, it's closer. So I go in there and he says, oh, by the way, if you need some paper, there's some old costing drawings standing up in the corner, and you just tear a piece off. And of course, Costin was the designer of the last of the Lister Jaguars that he made in the late 1950s.
The one after the Nobel.
In the late 1950s. And he said to me, then we started talking about that, having said about Costin, and I said to him, well, I think I know everything that was wrong with the car. And you obviously took your eye off the ball, Brian, which can often happen and it's happened to me when you introduce a designer into your company, when you are a designer yourself, but you feel that this new designer you've got is much bigger than you and better than you to bring it on further. And I think what he saw in me was a younger guy that wasn't at the stage where it was just money, 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 where it was more, let's make a quicker, better car. That there was never going to be any profit in the early days. Quite often a loss.
What do you mean no profit? You were buying a £25,000 car and selling it for £100,000.
Because you have to put the quality into it. That means that, you know, your customer, your client is going to become your friend, and, you know, not somebody that's chasing you around.
You just put a bumper on the front and a bumper on the back.
No,
That was all it was.
it wasn't like that, because that wasn't the side of it that I liked. I liked the pure performance and the handling.
So what
and
did
the
you
braking.
do to the standard road-going XJS?
Everything. I mean, there was nothing that was standard about it. You know, the engines were bored out to 7 litre, or they started off at 6 litre and went out to 7 litre, and so on and so on. More and more and more and more and more.
And the bodywork was standard, or did you?
No, the bodywork was completely
was it
modified. Yeah, because they were big wheels. We had like 12-inch wheels on the back, whereas the standard was 6-inch. So it was all double. Everything was double. We were doing 90% of the work in-house, including all the trimming, bodywork, painting, engine building, transmission work. Because we launched the car, the Le Mans, which was the last one of the Jaguar ones. Yeah. We said we'd make 50. We'd launched one in the workshop. We had a marquee outside. I invited 100 different people, journalists and friends, clients and others. And through the door that night, we had 300 people. And Brian Lister was there. We'd had Ferraris and Lamborghinis and everything parked outside. And I sold 35 cars that night. And I took 35 deposits of 21,000 apiece that night, in this rainy November night. Then the recession kicked in, and you don't really see it coming. You know, yourself, you're like busy, and you know, I was quite highly leveraged by this time at the bank. And I ended up with 5 guys that actually were doing probably 70% of the entire work on the cars, certainly all the clever stuff. And then, you know, I thought, well, if I can hold these 5 guys together, you know, I can maybe do something.
But the XJS sales pretty much stopped overnight.
The XJS sales stopped pretty much overnight. The 300 grand sort of depleted quite quickly.
In the middle of all this chaos, you decided to build a supercar.
No, I decided to make a little wind tunnel model. And I had a friend down the road who had a carpenter's shop. And I took my drawings of what my idea was down to him. And I said to him, there, make me a 25%. I gave him the dimensions. Make me a 25% wooden.
This was the Storm then?
Yeah.
You named it by that stage?
Yeah, we named it by that stage. Make me a 25% model of that. So you scale it down. Here are the overall dimensions. You scale it down, and then you carve it out of one bit and glue other bits on. A car that wasn't around at the time like that. But also uniquely about the car was it was flat bottom, whereas there'd never been a front engine car made before where it was a flat bottom.
What was the advantage of that then?
Aerodynamics. So I brought back this model, and we had a little reception where we had a few trophies from what we'd won in a few years and stuff, and you'd walk in and see these pictures. Well, there's a desk there, no one sat there, and I plonked this model onto that desk, and I just went about my day. I couldn't, you know. Anyway, only later in the same day that I picked it up, this client of mine walks in with his big XJS, drives in with his big XJS Lister for a service. And he says to me, his name was Brian Standing, actually. He's quite big in the Lister picture now. He said to me, what's that on the desk? I said, oh, yeah, that's the new Lister Storm. That's the model, that's the wind tunnel model of the new Lister Storm. And he said, when are you going to start making that? So I said, well, I'm going to start right now. I'm just looking for some funding to kick it off. And he said, well, what do you want to do first? I said, well, I need to make a prototype, like a one-off prototype, which we can make more or less in-house with some other. And he said, well, what do you think that's going to cost? I said, well, I've got an idea that it's going to cost somewhere around £250,000. So he pulls out his checkbook and writes me a cheque for £250,000.
And the Lister Storm was born.
Just like that, you know, go and make a prototype, which I did. And of course, we only had this handful of guys, five guys, and other things I had to do. Like, I had no experience. I knew it was going to be made of aluminium honeycomb, but I had no experience, and none of us had any experience of aluminium honeycomb. Yeah. So we found a guy in Northampton who was very experienced in it and had made a lot of Porsche 962s and those cars and stuff like that.
Was that Thompson?
Yeah, John Thompson. Yeah. And because I had a friend who was Tony Southgate, who designed the Le Mans winning Jaguars and all the Formula One cars you can think of, and Indy cars. Yeah. And you know, he obviously had a lot more contacts than I had in this field. So Tony would, you know, free of charge, I'd just phone him up as a young guy, and he became my friend, and he helped me. We started to make the car, and I start driving this thing around. Local press get hold of it because they see me driving it around, and then other press through the local press. The other press get hold of it, and you then start to see pictures of it emerge in Autocar and that kind of thing. The price tag was 187,500, I think. And anyway, the prototype was the prototype. Actually, the prototype had an aluminium body because that's how we had to start it. Yeah. Whereas the first car that we made had all carbon fibre bodywork. Used to go into a restaurant in Chelsea Harbour, because this is where this guy lived, called the Canteen, and this restaurant was owned by a chef called Marco Pierre White, you might like. But his partner was Michael Caine of the Italian.
My name is.
Yeah, yeah. And Michael Caine used to sit in the corner in this restaurant. So when I was ready, I walked up to him, plucked up the courage, and I said to him, "Oh, Mr."
In your normal shy manner.
Yeah, in my normal shy manner. "Mr. Caine, my name is Laurence Pearce, and I've made a supercar." And he goes, "Yeah, you're having a laugh." And I said, "And I want you to launch it at Earls Court. I'm launching it at Earls Court in October. And I want you to be sitting in the car when I pull the cover off. And there's Michael Caine, sits in the car, he opens the door and he goes to all the journalists, 'This is not an Italian job.'" And I'd worked it all out. And he said to me, "Son, you haven't got enough money to get me to take you to the toilet." So anyway, through this other friend I'd had, he was a friend of Michael Winner. And Michael Winner was another interesting guy, as you know, an interesting director. Yeah. And I phoned Michael Winner and he goes, "Winner?" And I go, "Yes." And he says to me, I said, "What do you want?" He says, "Well, you can get Jenny Seagrave, but she'll be £10,000. She is my partner, you know." And I said, "Yeah, well, so will you ask her then? But tell her I haven't got anything like £10,000. But I could give her £3,000 and I could get her picked up from your home with my friend with his Ferrari, take you to Earls Court, look after her, take her back, and that's it for £3,000. Well, I put the phone down to Winner. 5 minutes later, she picked up the phone. She rang me up and said, "Right, you better let me know more." And I said to her, "Well, I want you to wear a blue dress or something." She said, "Don't bother to tell me about that. You leave that to me. What colour's the car?" And that was it. And then we went to Earls Court, obviously. And the day before, the first day, the show day of the car, I know you were there actually.
Yeah. Top Gear film.
Yeah, and that made the papers the next morning, and it made the Nationals. On that launch day of the paper, it made.
I wish it would be I love that. This is not an Italian.
No, this is not an Italian. I mean, I'd invented that thing.
I know.
And we were getting bits like this in most of the Nationals, the Times, Telegraph, that sort of thing.
Did it have the tag then as the fastest four-door car?
Yeah, the fastest four-door car, four-seater car. Yeah. With a boot space and so on and so on. And it was fast. Yeah. I mean, it was.
What power did that? That was a 7 litre or the 6 litre?
7 litre, but it was raw. Now, bear in mind, there was no. Today, you have, well, even late, not far off later then, you had sophisticated engine management, where you could program it to be the situation that you wanted. So whatever the engine could do, you could program it to have the right fuel and the right ignition at any certain point in the engine's range.
So what power were you advertising?
Well, in those days, you didn't have that. So you had some crude system of boosting up fuel pressure to cope with the extra power. Well, we were getting like 600 horsepower, which was quite massive. And the car wasn't a big, it was big, but it wasn't a heavy car because it was all aluminium and carbon fibre.
Yeah.
So
You remember what it weighed?
it was like 1,800 kilos, something like that.
Yeah.
1,800 kilos. So it was under 2 tons.
Yeah.
Whereas the XJS would have been 2.5 tons. So, it was a big step down. So, of course, when you got in it and drove it, it immediately felt like a really lightweight car, Anyway, so we launched it at Earls Court and the next day, and it was very successful. And I say that we had, actually in the magazines that week, we had like 70% of the media coverage for that event.
There's still not many orders coming in.
Well, the first car was sold off the stand. That one was sold off the stand to Sultan of Brunei straight away. So we had to then, you see, it was a bit difficult because being such a small company, a small manufacturer, you sold that car, but obviously another guy had paid for that car, and he was going to, as you took it away off the stand, he was going to drive it away. So then you have to say to him, well, no, actually your car's not going to be ready for a year now. And of course that's difficult to say to him. So you've got to give him some sweetener, which it comes in a way of discount, I suppose. Yeah. So things like that happen. So already, although you've sold the first one and your heart's big and you've got £250,000 in or whatever, you've actually shot yourself in the foot, really. And so, but anyway, we started to make them.
But finally, Laurence, we've come all this way. Can we look round your little Aladdin's cave?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, of course you can.
So, who's this Katek?
Katek. Yes, it's from North America. They make these Corvette engines. They made the factory engines for the Corvette program.
So which of all the listers, and this is the only prototype you've ever made, which is the one you're most proud of?
Well, I guess it's the, at the end of the day, it's going to be the GT1 down in the other garage because that's the car that won the first races. And it's my first carbon car.
Carbon discs. So complex, all the wiring. Is this what you're putting back together again, the wiring loom? And various other glorious machines, undercovers. So what was Bryonics? Bryonics?
It was a mad cow disease testing.
Oh, that was your sponsor's company. Yeah.
That was, this is the car. I mean, he paid for this car, didn't he?
Right, let's go and look at your favourite car then. Come on. Where have you got that hidden? Newcastle logo on the front.
Yeah. I actually do think this is definitely my favourite one. And this was the one I wanted to end up with.